Operations management is one of those quiet crafts that shapes most of what we experience in the world without ever announcing itself. You feel it when the package you ordered arrives the day you needed it most, or when a small neighborhood cafe can serve a perfect cappuccino in 2 minutes even during the morning rush. You also feel it when things go wrong. The flight delay that cascades into a missed connection, the empty shelf where your favorite product usually sits, the hospital waiting room that seems to be moving no one along. In each of these moments, there's a choreography of people, processes, materials, money, data, and decisions unfolding behind the scenes. Operations management is that choreography, the art and science of designing and running systems that reliably meet a promise. And at its heart is a deceptively simple question that never quite goes away. How do we make something good, consistently, at the right cost, and deliver it when it's needed? It's useful to think of operations not as a department but as a way of seeing. You look at the world and you start to see flows instead of isolated events. Raw materials and information come in, they move through steps that transform them, waits happen, decisions are made, quality is checked, and then outputs are delivered to customers who have expectations that might be clear or vague, reasonable or wild. The operator's job is to map that river, remove the rocks that create turbulence, and deepen the parts that run shallow when demand swells. You can draw the process on a page with little boxes and arrows, or you can walk the floor and let your feet tell you where the bottlenecks are by noticing where work piles up. If you spend any time at all in a busy kitchen, you'll notice that the true constraint isn't the number of cooks but the grill space, or it's the speed of the expo who coordinates plates as they go out, or it's the single ticket printer that jams when the lunch rush hits. In operations, the constraint is the part of the system that limits the whole. You can throw resources at everything else, but until you widen the narrowest aperture, you're just creating inventory that waits to be processed later. Once you start paying attention to constraints, time becomes your most honest currency. There's a magical little insight that operators live by. The average number of things in a system equals the average rate at which things arrive times the average time they spend in the system. You don't need to remember the formula to feel its implications. If a cafe gets 20 orders every 10 minutes and each order spends 10 minutes in the system from payment to pickup, you're going to have a line of orders that feels exactly like a traffic jam. Shorten the time in the system and you reduce the work in process. Speed up the flow and you can serve more people without making them wait. People sometimes think of inventory as boxes on shelves. In truth, inventory is also people in a queue, emails in an inbox, features in a product backlog. Work that's sitting doesn't add value to anyone until it moves. This is where process design and capacity planning meet reality. A process isn't just a list of steps. It's an arrangement of capabilities that has a certain speed, flexibility, and quality built in. The rate of a system is defined by its slowest step, so balance matters. You can have 5 checkout lanes, but if the store has a single bagging area designed for 3, your practical capacity is 3. You can hire more nurses, but if there are only 2 triage rooms available, the weight will shift upstream. This is why good operations people obsess over seemingly minor constraints. The width of a hallway that forces carts to wait, the printer that's shared by too many teams, the software permission that requires an extra approval, the setup time required to switch a machine from one product to another. Every minute you spend changing over is a minute you're not producing and a minute customers might be waiting. So the game becomes finding ways to reduce those setup times, sometimes dramatically, by doing prep work earlier, by creating standardized kits, by snapping instead of screwing, by separating the internal parts of a changeover that require stopping the process from the external parts that can be done ahead of time while the process still runs. If you've ever prepped all your ingredients before you start cooking a complicated meal, you've done a simple version of this. Another habit that marks experienced operators is an allergy to variability. Variation is the mother of queues. When arrivals are unpredictable and service times jump around, waits lengthen in ways that feel unfair. You see this at the supermarket. Even with 2 lanes that seem equally staffed, one will snake back because it drew a cluster of full carts while the other had mostly quick orders. There are two paths out of this trap. You either reduce variation or you buffer against it. Reducing variation can mean smoothing arrivals with appointment systems, offering incentives that steer demand to off-peak times, or simplifying the menu of options so each job takes a more predictable amount of time. Buffering against variation can mean adding capacity, holding inventory, or adding time into the schedule. None of those buffers is free. Extra capacity costs money. Extra stock ties up cash and risks obsolescence. Extra time slows everything down. The art is in choosing the right mix for your promise to customers. If you run an emergency department, you must build buffer capacity because the stakes are high and the arrivals are unpredictable. If you run a bespoke furniture shop, you might reduce variation by only taking orders that fit a standard set of designs and by scheduling deliveries in predictable waves. Quality sits at the center of operations not as a score but as a mindset. The most powerful shift any organization can make is to stop inspecting quality in at the end and start building it in at every step. That means simplifying designs so there are fewer ways to make a mistake. It means designing fixtures and forms so the wrong choice is hard to make. It means responding to defects not by blaming people but by treating them as the system teaching you where it's fragile. Some organizations formalize this with problem-solving routines embedded in daily work. You see quick experiments run at the smallest possible scale, data gathered by the people who do the work, and the results folded back into the standard way of doing things. Inventory, the friend and foe of operations, deserves its own reflection. It's tempting to see inventory simply as a cushion against uncertainty, and it is. But it also hides problems. When you have a lot of stock, you can afford sloppy setups, long lead times, and flaky suppliers because you don't feel the pain until much later. When you drain inventory down to more honest levels, issues surface. The broken machine becomes visible because you can't meet the next day's orders. The unreliable supplier can't hide behind the buffer. This is why so many continuous improvement efforts start by gradually reducing inventory. It forces you to solve the real constraints. Of course, you can go too far the other way. If you strip buffers in a volatile environment and you don't fix the underlying variability or strengthen your relationships, you just create stockouts and chaos. The point isn't to have zero inventory, it's to have the right inventory in the right places for the promises you intend to keep. That becomes a game of segmentation. Some items move fast and predictably, so you automate reordering. Some are slow and unpredictable, so you manage them carefully, maybe even make to order. Some are critical for service continuity, so you hold more. The mix is specific to your business and it changes with seasons, product life cycles, and even social trends. Forecasting sits awkwardly next to all this because it's both essential and suspect. You need a sense of demand to plan capacity, order materials, and schedule people. But the future is noisy and change doesn't announce itself in time to update spreadsheets. Good operators hold forecasts lightly. They triangulate from multiple signals, historical trends, sales team intel, market indicators, even weather. They keep planning loops tight so the forecast is updated frequently and the cost of being wrong is contained. They also build processes resilient to forecast error. That can mean shorter lead times so you can react faster, modular products that allow you to postpone the final specification until you know what's actually needed, or contracts with suppliers that include options for flexing volumes. In some industries, incentives along the chain get misaligned and amplify the wobble. A small spike in consumer demand at the end can become a large swing in orders upstream because each node adds a safety factor and reacts to signals rather than reality. Share information and coordinate decisions, and the whole system steadies. Hide information and optimize locally, and the bullwhip effect cracks you. There's a bridge between operations and strategy that's easy to ignore but ultimately decides whether the system works or fights itself. If strategy is a set of promises to the market, operations is the set of capabilities that keep those promises. You can say you're going to be the fastest and the most personalized, but can your factories, stores, and support teams deliver on both at the same time? If not, you face a choice: adjust the promise or change the system. Too often, organizations make aspirational promises and leave operations to cope. You see teams heroically sprinting to meet launch dates, working weekends to clear backlogs, living in a permanent state of exception. That adrenaline can feel like progress, but it's not sustainable. The better path is to decide where you'll be superb, where you'll be acceptable, and where you won't play, and to tune your processes accordingly. That clarity aligns decisions from the executive suite to the night shift. Technology runs like a bright thread through modern operations, but it's a thread you need to weave carefully. There's a temptation to see software and automation as magic that will clear bottlenecks and banish errors. Sometimes they do. A well-designed system can turn a pile of unstructured orders into a clean schedule that respects constraints and flows work evenly across teams. Sensors can tell you when a machine is drifting out of spec before it fails. Robots can handle dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks with consistent precision, freeing people to do what people do best: solve problems, empathize, adapt. But the force multiplier works both ways. If you automate a broken process, you get bad outcomes faster. If you bring in a new planning system without agreeing on how decisions will be made and which data is the single source of truth, you get energetic misalignment. The wisdom in technology adoption is to go slow where it matters. Map the process first. Clarify the constraints. Try a pilot in one area. Learn. Then scale. If you peek inside high-performing operations today, you'll often find a nervous system of connected devices, real-time dashboards, and algorithms predicting the next hour's workload. But you'll also find whiteboards with hand-drawn charts and daily huddles where teams share yesterday's wins and frustrations. That juxtaposition isn't accidental. The tech provides visibility and speed, the human routines create shared attention and the capacity to act. You might see a digital twin of a warehouse, running simulations on different slotting patterns to reduce travel time for pickers, and alongside it, a simple rule that says if a worker has to bend more than twice to pick an item, we redesign that shelf. The detail at the micro level matters because operations is made up of countless micro movements, each creating friction or flow. Scheduling, a word that sounds dry, is where much of the everyday magic happens. It's part chess, part Tetris, part weather forecasting. In a factory, you look at the set of jobs, the machines they require, the setup times between them, the availability of skilled operators, and then you try to order work so that you minimize idle time at the bottleneck and meet due dates. In a hospital, you schedule operating rooms, surgeons, anesthetists, and post-op beds, knowing that cases run long, emergencies intrude, and patient safety trumps throughput. In software, you schedule sprints around dependencies and deploy windows, balancing urgent bug fixes with the pipeline of new features. The puzzle is constrained and always evolving. Algorithms help, but so does the operator's heuristic sense. Don't let urgent displace important week after week. Protect the bottleneck from interruptions. Group similar work to reduce changeovers, but beware of long runs that create starvation elsewhere. Keep some contingency because reality doesn't ask permission to break your plan. Logistics, the physical ballet of moving things from here to there, is another arena where operations shows its craft. You think about space and time differently in this world. The location of a warehouse is a trade between being close to customers for speed and being centralized for efficiency. The layout inside the warehouse is a game of reducing the distance people and machines travel, making sure high-frequency items are near the front and that the path winds in a way that avoids crossing traffic. The vehicles you choose reflect product characteristics: weight, volume, fragility, perishability. Add to that the final stretch of delivery, the infamous last mile, where the cost per unit explodes and the human experience crystallizes. A package tracked to the minute that misses its window by an hour feels worse than a package with a 2-day window that arrives early. Operations design shapes that emotion. You might offer customers choices about delivery windows, charge appropriately, and then live up to the options you promised. Even the language of the notifications influences the experience. Transparency without excuses builds trust. As organizations grow, the complexity of operations tends to outpace the growth of revenue if no one is paying attention. You end up with too many products, each with its own parts and quirks, too many variations that exist because someone once said yes, too many special cases handled by a handful of experts who become bottlenecks. Rationalizing the portfolio is an operational act as much as a marketing one. You look at which items actually sell, which drive profitability, which drive complexity, and you prune. You find ways to create variety later in the process, allowing you to standardize upstream. You set rules for when a custom request is worth it. You design for operations as much as for desirability. A beautiful product that's a nightmare to assemble or repair is a failure of the larger system. A service that needs 3 systems to talk to each other for a simple transaction is a design debt that operations pays in daily interest. One of the most profound shifts happening in operations today is the embrace of sustainability not as an add-on but as a design principle. The old narrative pitted cost against environmental responsibility. The more nuanced view recognizes waste as waste, whether it's scrap, energy leakage, rework, or unnecessary transport. Lowering energy use through better equipment and smarter scheduling often saves money. Designing products for longevity and repair reduces the need to churn out replacements while building stronger customer relationships. Closing loops in supply chains, reusing materials, and thinking in terms of entire life cycles opens new business models. Of course, there are real trade-offs. Recycled materials can be more expensive, complying with stricter standards can slow changeovers. But the operations lens is uniquely suited to find pragmatic paths because it sees the entire system rather than only the marketing story or the quarterly cost line. Then there is resilience, the quality no balance sheet shows but every operator feels. The last few years have been a brutal teacher. Pandemics, geopolitical shifts, extreme weather, these shocks exposed fragilities in lean, globalized systems that were tuned for cost and speed. The response isn't to retreat into siloed, bloated buffers everywhere, but to be intentional about where you build redundancy, where you shorten supply lines, and where you keep critical capabilities in-house. It might mean dual sourcing key components, carrying strategic stock of items with long replenishment times, and drafting playbooks for rerouting work when a node fails. It might mean building better early warning systems, not just for demand signals but for supplier health, transport disruptions, and policy changes. And it certainly means investing in people's cross-skilling so the operation can reconfigure itself under stress. Resilience is partly architecture and partly culture. Teams that know how to solve problems together under normal conditions are the ones that adapt fastest when the plan shatters. If you zoom into the micro level again, you can see how these large themes live in tiny habits. A team starts each shift with a quick stand-up, looking at yesterday's outcomes, the plan for today, and the known risks. Someone mentions a recurring snag and the group decides to try a small change and check its effect by lunchtime. Later, a defect is found and instead of quietly fixing it and moving on, someone pulls a metaphorical cord to pause the line, gather, find the root cause, and update the standard. The tone isn't blame, it's curiosity. Leaders spend time on the floor asking what's in the way and removing obstacles. Improvements get documented with enough detail that someone else can replicate them, and the people who do the work own the process. These are not glamorous acts, but they compound. Over time, the operation becomes smoother, faster, and more reliable, and the organization feels different. Work is less exhausting because you're fighting the process less and using your energy to serve the customer more. Cost, a topic that appears in every board conversation, is treated differently by operators who understand this compounding. They don't start by slicing budgets, they start by hunting waste. They question why so much effort is required to accomplish a task, why so many approvals exist, why parts travel back and forth across the plant, why data gets re-entered 3 times. They celebrate solutions that save time and reduce errors rather than just cutting heads. When the process flows better, costs fall as a consequence and quality rises as a bonus. This isn't naive. There are moments when you must restructure. But the default lens remains. If we fix the system, our people can deliver more value with less strain. That orientation also changes how you invest. You spend on things that improve the constraint, that reduce variability, that shorten lead times, that increase visibility. You avoid spending on nice-to-have complexity that creates maintenance burdens without improving the promise. At the boundary between operations and product development, there's a dance that decides how quickly good ideas reach the world. The old pattern was to hand designs over the wall to manufacturing or to the service organization and hope for the best. The newer pattern pulls operations into design early. When production people and maintainers sit with designers, the product becomes easier to build and support. Mounting points align, tolerances relax where they can, and service panels are accessible without disassembling half the unit. In software, development and operations blurred into a single loop for similar reasons. When the people who build features also own their performance in production, you get different choices about how much to simplify, how to instrument, how to recover from failures, how to deploy safely. The themes echo across domains: shorter feedback loops, shared ownership, flow over resource utilization, and making work visible. Operations research, with its optimization models and simulations, provides powerful tools, but the craft lies in knowing where to apply them and when to stop. You can build a beautiful linear program to allocate production across plants and time, but if your inputs are wrong or the real constraint is a human judgment that can't be expressed in the model, you'll have elegance without utility. The sweet spot is combining rigorous analysis with ground truth. You might simulate different staffing scenarios for a call center and then test the best 2 in a live environment with a small region. You might use heuristics that perform well enough and are simple enough to be explained to the team that must live with them every day. There's dignity in practicality here. A good rule of thumb implemented consistently beats a complex rule that no one follows. Leadership in operations isn't about the loud speech at the all hands. It's about the quiet moments where trust is built or eroded. It's the choice to listen to a frontline worker's idea and try it. It's the patience to let the team run an experiment that might fail rather than dictate the obvious answer from your vantage point. It's the discipline to hold the line on quality even when a deadline is breathing down your neck. It's the humility to admit when a target was unrealistic and to adjust before the system starts distorting itself to make the number. And it's the courage to make a hard choice about cutting complexity, retiring a product, or investing in a new capability that won't pay off this quarter. The culture you cultivate shows up in the numbers later. Pride in workmanship, psychological safety, shared purpose, these are not abstract virtues, they're operational assets. There's also a human factor that's easy to miss when you get absorbed in diagrams and dashboards. Work has a rhythm. People have bodies that tire and minds that need variety and meaning. Ergonomics matters. The placement of a bench, the height of a shelf, the size of a screen font, the noise level, the way a schedule accommodates life events, all of these shape performance in ways that no model captures. When you design operations around human realities, you reduce injuries, you lower error rates, you raise engagement, and you make work more sustainable. The best operators see people not as cogs but as the only adaptive engines in the system. They combine standardization where it reduces friction with autonomy where judgment matters. They train broadly and reward collaboration across silos because flow beats turf. As you reflect on your own world through this lens, it helps to carry a small set of questions. What is the promise we're making, and to whom? Where does the work actually flow, and where does it stall? What is the real constraint today, not last quarter? What variation is natural and what is self-imposed? What are we measuring, and is it shaping the behavior we want? Where are the buffers, and are they hiding problems we need to see? How close is decision-making to the work? What aren't we seeing because we're not standing where the work happens? How would this process feel if I were the customer? The answers to these questions rarely require a budget to explore. Sometimes walking the path a customer walks and taking notes yields more insight than a thick report. In the end, operations management is an ongoing conversation with reality. It doesn't end because you hit a target this month or install a new system. The environment shifts, customer preferences drift, competitors change, and inside your own organization people come and go with their own energy and ideas. The operation is a living thing. You tend it. You notice when it's getting brittle and you loosen it up. You notice when it's getting sloppy and you tune it. You invest in the basics without apology. Clean workspaces, clear standards, reliable tools, calm scheduling, honest metrics. You celebrate learning more than heroics. And you honor the quiet triumph when the promise is kept for the 1000th time with no drama. Because if there's a proof of mastery in this discipline, it's not the grand rescue but the steady hum of a system that delivers without drawing attention to itself, leaving your customers to experience your brand as simply reliable in a world that so often isn't. Looking forward, the frontier of operations won't be defined by a single technology or method but by the ability to integrate many. Artificial intelligence will plan scenarios more quickly and spot anomalies earlier. Robotics will become more flexible and safer to work alongside. Data will be richer and more immediate. But the differentiator will still be judgment, choosing where to place the bet, how to pace the change, how to keep the team included and energized. The organizations that flourish will be those that treat operations as a craft and a strategic asset, not a cost center. They will develop leaders who know how to look at a process and see its soul, who can balance efficiency with resilience, who can align the daily work with the company's deepest promises. They will know when to speed up and when to wait, when to widen the aperture and when to focus, when to standardize and when to leave room for improvisation. If you're new to this way of thinking, you can start small. Take a single process you own or influence. Map it as it really happens. Count the handoffs. Time the steps. Talk to the people who live inside it. Ask them what gets in the way. Fix one thing that matters. Watch what happens. Write down what you learn. In a week, do it again. In a month, you'll have a handful of small wins and a refined sense of what the real constraints are. In a year, you'll have built the muscle that separates average operations from great ones, the ability to see the system, to run experiments, and to translate learning into better daily work. From that foundation, the larger puzzles, network design, capacity investment, technology choices, become less abstract. They become the natural next questions in a conversation you've already started. And that conversation is the work. It is how promises become reality, one flow at a time.